Chapter 1. Part 3. The dwarfs of the Dragon's Ridge quickly carried out the order of their general, the great Derek Whitestone. At first the collapse seemed to stop them, but, although these dwarfs are mainly warriors, they are still dwarfs and maintain the ability to handle stones since they carry it in their blood. They had to lay down their weapons and organize themselves, but after an hour they managed to break through by making an improvised gallery stable enough to continue their march and reach the entrance of the 6th level. She was not General Derico's favorite, but she was one of his trusted officers. For Tanya Blackgem it was the moment she had been waiting for since the beginning of the war. Since I was a child I had heard the rumors about the massacre in the blood mines, that's what the dwarfs call the red mines. It was this unexpected defeat that led to the failure of the First Iron War. Since then, what had happened in that mine was surrounded by a halo of terror and mystery. The few survivors spoke of vague references to a blue demon, of something utterly terrifying that slaughtered all the dwarf warriors. No one believed the survivors, they took them for crazy. They all thought that they were either fantastic justifications for the defeat or suffered hallucinations born of the terror of seeing all their comrades in arms dead. The real explanation was much simpler and less fantastic. The dwarf legions were drowned because the king of Demember flooded the galleries thanks to the water that came from an underground river whose course runs very close to the galleries. Even so, Tanya was left in doubt, since the survivors were inside the mines and the rest were not. Such a defeat was not going to happen again. The dwarfs of the ridge in silence, with patience and away from the red mines had managed to divert the course of the underground river. That is why they would win this time. They had prepared for a long time conscientiously so as not to be defeated again. The general ordered the march to be resumed, whereupon the phalanx began to form. Within the confined spaces of the underground galleries the phalanx formation of the Legion of the Brothers of Danka Atta was unrivaled. It was the elite troop of the dwarfs of the Dragon Ridge, the pride of King Broke Blackgem. They had already easily won in Kara Mines and the Fortunate Mines. Once they passed the area of the collapse caused by the defenders, they were able to complete their formation of 5 lines. First the dwarfs with the large shields covered with sharp spikes, then the spearmen, then dwarfs with crossbows, the 4th reinforcement, with shields and swords ready to take the place of the fallen comrades, a group of 10 dwarfs per row. As you can understand, the line that was formed was enormous since the human mines were not as wide as the dwarf ones, but they had an advantage. In narrow spaces the phalanx was unbeatable, although its advance was slow. It took Tanya more than an hour to advance with her battalion. Silence was natural just before entering combat. They did not expect greater resistance than the one they encountered on the 7th level. The plan was clear, to take the mine and attack the defenders of the blood mines from the rear. When he reached the front he began to hear the screams, the wailings, the smell of blood began to flood the gallery. In a wider area of the mine that formed a kind of circular square was General Derico on 2 or 3 shields reorganizing his dwarfs. He shouted very nervously. It was not usual for the general, something was not right. The fallen were hundreds. The dwarf did not have time to react. He could only hear a sentence full of terror. The blue demon is coming. Tanya was an experienced warrior but she was not prepared for that. Her first line was annihilated in a second, the ranks were broken, some soldiers seeing the massacre tried to flee and collided with those who advanced, generating more chaos. The corpses were piled up on the ground. Tanya tried to keep her composure, but in that darkness it was impossible to see anything, and even though the gloom was her natural habitat and she had her eyes used to it. Then there appeared from the background, those blue eyes illuminating everything in their path, a light of death. Next to the blue demon was another enemy that killed those that the demon seemed not to finish. Tanya stood firm and managed with some soldiers from her battalion to hold the position, and then advanced towards the enemy. They did not take long to make the first onslaught with their shields. A total failure. The only thing she remembered from that fight is that she was thrown towards a wall as if it were a stone. The blow was brutal. She dislocated her shoulder and was wounded in the leg. She was out of combat, sitting on top of the corpses of comrades with her back against the wall, but from that position she could see the massacre. The legends were true, the blue demon had returned to defeat the dwarfs again. Despite the efforts of General Derico, all the lines of the phalanx were massacred. There came a time when the rest of the dwarf troops could not advance as the corpses of their comrades formed an impassable wall and fell on them. Until a blue explosion sent the corpses flying into the air, the dismembered remains struck the dwarf's helm.